Murderer's Curse, written and read by Bill Lenihan. The full moon shone above broken clouds that raced across an angry sky. The path was narrow, shrouded by woods on either side. He'd never walked this path before, although somehow it seemed familiar. He thought he heard a scream. Stopping, he listened. Was it a fox calling to his mates? No, he knew it wasn't. He was a man of the country. He knew such sounds. Standing still, he watched the shadows moving among the trees. As the moon broke free of the clouds, the shadows moved like phantoms watching him. Again he heard the scream, this time louder. It came from in front, further down the path. The scream continued, blood-curdling. Suddenly he felt fear. Should he turn and run? Should whatever creature of the night turn on him and satiate his bloodlust? He turned to run, but where the woods had been, now stood a single tree. Its boughs were long, hanging. It had an air of foreboding. He thought he saw his shadow that moved back and forth with the breeze. He froze, afraid to continue. Suddenly silence filled his head. The screaming had stopped. Slowly he started walking in the direction where he had heard the scream. The moon moved from behind a cloud, so bright it did now shine. It was as if it defeated the darkness in a battle of wills. He saw something before him. At first he couldn't distinguish the form, only that it was moving. The movement had rhythm, a rhythm he knew. The silence was broken by a groan, a long groan that filled the silence and flooded his mind. Drawing closer, he saw before him the body of a young girl. On top of her was a man. He looked familiar. Desperately he tried to turn, to hide among the trees, but he couldn't. He was being compelled to move forward. Whatever force it was that now possessed him, he was powerless. Suddenly the man rose, having finished his act of bestiality, and came towards him. The expression on the man's face was one of evil. He saw the rage upon his face. His eyes were ablaze. As he looked into his eyes, he recognized the face. He knew he was looking into his own eyes. He turned to run, suddenly free from what had possessed him. But each way he turned, he saw the tree. He could not escape it. He was seized with panic and ran towards the tree, eager to get past it. As he approached, he saw what he had thought was a shadow was in fact a man, a noose placed around his neck, head bent forward, pushed by the hangman's knot, eyes wide, bulging, mouth open, tongue hanging to the side, carved into his forehead the word murderer. The blood had run down his face in streaks. In terror he looked at what was himself, a grotesque image of what he had been. He wanted to scream, but could not make a sound, as he felt the rope tighten around his throat. Again he was looking into his face. It was he who was now hanging from the tree. The trial was being held in an old barn that smelled of animals, old dust and sweat. It was packed with a baying crowd who refused to be quiet. The judge sat on the back of an old cart. He seemed to enjoy the attention and constantly banging his gavel on the bench and laughed. As the barn doors were flung open, he saw himself being dragged into the barn and thrown to the floor. He wanted to do something to help himself, but couldn't. His guilt held him back. He could barely stand, so heavy were the shackles that now held him. He had had only bread and water since his capture. Confined in a pigsty and unable to stand, he lay in the mud and listened to the grunting of the pigs as they were fed. Finally they came for him. Dragging him out of the sty, he was forced onto his knees. One of them drew a knife and cut into his forehead. He screamed, but it did nothing to lessen the pain. Then, pulling his head back, he spat in the face and called him a murderer. There had been no one to support him with food. Those that could have had been driven away. One of their caravans had been wrecked. They thought it belonged to him. But the truth being, he owned nothing other than what he stole. He had argued that they say all gypsies are thieves, so why shouldn't he steal? They had tolerated him because he was family, but the murder of a child was a step too far. He was now no longer a memory. There had been only one witness against him, but it was enough. Old and wizened, she was a great-grandmother of the girl. All that remained of the family, she told the judge. Had not the Great Plague taken them all? The girl had been a milkmaid. She was the only support the old woman had. Now I beg on the street, she pleaded. I must have compensation. Without compensation, I will starve. There will be no compensation, shouted the judge. You can take all the wretch owns, for it is nothing but the rags on his back. She started screaming, vengeance, vengeance will be mine. He saw himself look up. The judge banged his gavel and shouted to the guards to remove her, but neither moved. Both looked fearfully in her direction. She stopped shouting and all went quiet. Slowly she walked towards the man that had taken her great-granddaughter's life and looked at him, she said. You will be cursed to relive your evil deeds till your soul is cast into the eternal fire. Until then your evil face will haunt you. She turned and hobbled from the barn. The defendant will look at the bench, ordered the judge. He saw his head was still bowed. A jailer grabbed his hair from behind and with force pulled his head back. So he was looking up at the judge. You were found guilty of the heinous crime of rape and murder, for which you will now be removed from this court, where you shall be hung by the neck until dead. He banged his gavel. He watched himself being dragged, falling as he was pulled to his feet and hauled through the barn doors. Darkness was falling as he was manhandled down the path. The crowd followed, shouting and jeering. They were headed to a copse. One tree stood alone. It was a mighty oak. There were many torches lit that cast shadows that danced upon the ground. He followed from a distance. He saw a rope being thrown over the bough of the oak. He saw the furrow in the bark where the rope had sat many times before. A noose was placed about his neck as the crowd cheered. Slowly they raised him. His toes still touched the ground as he tried to support himself. Slowly he choked. He saw himself walk away from his hanging corpse and come towards him. He raised his arms to stop him, but could not. They were one and the same person. The full moon shone above the broken clouds that raced across an angry sky. The path was narrow, surrounded by woods on either side. He'd never walked this path before, although somehow it seemed familiar.